Have you ever noticed this? The moment you start healing, the moment your energy becomes calmer, the moment you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop chasing, certain people don't celebrate you. They don't say, "I'm proud of you." They don't feel inspired. Instead, they feel uncomfortable. Some slowly pull away. Some become sarcastic. Some start questioning your attitude. And some, without saying a word, begin to resent you. And it leaves you confused because you're not attacking anyone. You're not being rude. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just peaceful. So you start asking yourself, why does my growth bother them? Why do people who once liked me now seem irritated by my presence? Why does healing feel like it's costing me relationships instead of improving them? Here's the truth most people never hear. Your healing doesn't threaten everyone. It only threatens people who benefited from your pain. When you were overwhelmed, when you were insecure, when you over-explained, overgave, and undervalued yourself, you were predictable, you were manageable, you were easy to control. But healing changes something powerful. You stop reacting emotionally. You stop feeding dysfunction. You stop shrinking to keep others comfortable. And when you do that, toxic people don't feel happy for you. They feel exposed. Today, I'm going to explain why toxic people hate you when you start healing. Not emotionally, not spiritually, but psychologically. And once you truly understand this, you'll stop blaming yourself. You'll stop chasing closure, and you'll stop trying to fix relationships that were never meant to survive the healed version of you. Healing is not loud. It doesn't make announcements. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need validation. Real healing shows up in how you respond. You stop explaining yourself to people who already decided not to understand you. You stop overgiving just to feel accepted. You stop chasing approval from people who never planned to give it. And most importantly, you stop reacting emotionally to disrespect. From the outside, it may look like you've become distant, but in reality, you've become grounded. Here's the part most people don't realize. Toxic people benefit from your wounds. Your insecurity once made them feel superior. Your people-pleasing made them comfortable. Your self-doubt gave them influence over your choices. When you were hurting, you were easier to manage, easier to guilt, easier to manipulate. But healing changes the entire dynamic because now you don't bend, you don't beg, you don't chase. And when you heal, you don't just improve your own life, you quietly disrupt the role others had in it. You remove their access to your emotions, you remove their leverage, you remove their control, and that's where the tension begins. Not because you became difficult, but because you became free. Toxic people don't connect through love. They connect through control, comparison, and emotional leverage. They don't need honesty. They don't need growth. They need access to your reactions, access to your guilt, access to your confusion, access to your emotions without boundaries. When you were wounded, this access was easy. You tolerated behavior you shouldn't have. You apologized when you weren't wrong, just to keep things smooth. You stayed quiet to keep the peace, even when your peace was the thing being destroyed. And toxic people learned something from that. They learned how far they could push, how much they could take, how little they had to give in return. But healing changes one dangerous thing. You stop playing emotional games. You no longer explain yourself in circles. You no longer react on impulse. You no longer feel responsible for other people's feelings. And this is the moment everything shifts. Because when a toxic person loses access to your emotions, they don't feel calm. They feel exposed. Their manipulation stops working. Their guilt tactics fall flat. Their silence no longer controls you. Their anger no longer scares you. Without your reactions, they have nothing to hold on to. And instead of self-reflecting, instead of taking responsibility, they blame you. They call you cold. They call you selfish. They say you've changed. But what they're really saying is this: you're no longer behaving in a way I can control. And that, more than anything else, is why toxic people need you unhealed. Because a healed person is no longer predictable, and unpredictable people can't be manipulated. Let's be very clear about this. Toxic people don't hate you. They hate losing power over you, because power was never about dominance. It was about access. Access to your emotions, access to your reactions, access to your self-doubt. And healing quietly removes that access. When you heal, their manipulation stops working. The guilt trips no longer land. The silent treatment doesn't trigger anxiety anymore. Their anger loses its ability to control your behavior. You don't argue. You don't chase explanations. You don't feel the need to defend yourself. And to a toxic person, that feels threatening, because control only works when someone responds. So when someone realizes they can't control you anymore, they don't feel inspired. They feel exposed. That exposure shows up as frustration, as insecurity, as sudden outbursts of anger, or as passive aggression disguised as jokes, sarcasm, or concern. They might say you've changed. They might accuse you of being distant. They might try to provoke a reaction just to see if they still have access. But understand this: none of that is happening because you did something wrong. It's happening because you did something right. You chose self-respect over emotional chaos. You chose calm over conflict. You chose boundaries over approval. And when someone's power disappears, their behavior reveals who they really are. Not everyone wants to grow with you. Some people only want you small, reactive, and controllable. So if your healing made someone uncomfortable, that wasn't your mistake. That was your breakthrough. This is where it gets subtle. Toxic people almost never say, "I'm threatened by your growth." They don't say, "Your healing makes me uncomfortable." They don't admit, "I feel exposed by your boundaries." Instead, they disguise it. They say things like, "You've changed. You think you're better than everyone now. You're too quiet lately. You're acting distant. You're selfish now." But none of those statements are about you. They're translations. What they really mean is, your boundaries make me uncomfortable. I miss the version of you I could control. Your healing highlights what I've avoided in myself. Your calm presence interrupts their chaos. Your silence removes their stage. Your peace no longer feeds their emotional patterns. And that comparison hurts, because when you stop reacting, they're forced to sit with themselves. They can no longer distract themselves with your emotions. They can no longer redirect attention away from their behavior. They can no longer blame you for the imbalance. So they poke, they mock, they test, not to understand you, but to see if they can still get a reaction. They may joke at your expense. They may question your motives. They may label your growth as arrogance. But here's the truth. Mockery is a defense mechanism. It's what insecure people use when they feel powerless, but don't want to admit it. Your peace becomes a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable for people who avoid self-reflection. So, if someone starts attacking your character right after you set boundaries, that's not coincidence. That's confirmation. You didn't lose yourself. You didn't become cold. You didn't become selfish. You became unavailable to behavior that no longer deserves access to you. And that, more than anything, is what they can't handle. Here's the psychological truth. most people never hear. Healing is a mirror, not a loud one, not an aggressive one, a quiet, honest mirror. And that's exactly why it's so uncomfortable. When you grow, you don't have to point out dysfunction. You expose it. You don't have to call out immaturity. You highlight it. You don't have to confront unhealthy patterns. You reveal them simply by no longer participating. And toxic people hate mirrors because mirrors don't lie. They don't argue. They don't explain. They just reflect. Your calm reflects their emotional instability. Your boundaries reveal their sense of entitlement. Your silence exposes their constant need for attention and control. And suddenly they can see themselves, not through excuses, not through blame, but through contrast. That contrast creates discomfort because your healing forces a question they've been avoiding. If they can change, why haven't I? And instead of sitting with that question, instead of taking responsibility, they protect their ego. They project. They accuse you of being cold, distant, or selfish. They rewrite the story so you're the problem. They label your growth as arrogance or rejection. Projection is easier than reflection. Blaming you feels safer than facing themselves. So they criticize, they mock, they minimize your progress, not because your healing harmed them, but because it removed the illusion they were living under. Understand this. Your healing does not attack anyone. It does not judge anyone. It does not demand change from anyone else. It simply exists. And for people who have avoided themselves for years, that quiet presence is louder than any argument. So if your growth made someone uncomfortable, it's not because you became something worse. It's because you became something honest. This part is critical because this is where many people get pulled back. When toxic people feel you slipping away, they don't always react with anger. Sometimes they react with strategy. They start drama out of nowhere. They bring up the past, things you already healed from. They press on old wounds they know still feel sensitive. They suddenly become nice, caring, or supportive again. Or they guilt trip you emotionally, making you feel responsible for their pain. This pattern has a name. It's called regression pull. Regression pull happens when someone senses they're losing access to the version of you they benefited from, the version that overgave, overexplained, and tolerated too much. They don't miss you, they miss the role you played, because that older version made them comfortable, predictable, safe from accountability. So they try to pull you back into old dynamics. They remind you of how things used to be. They question your new boundaries. They frame your healing as distance, coldness, or abandonment. But here's the truth you need to hear clearly. You cannot heal and stay emotionally accessible to toxicity at the same time. Those two things cannot coexist. Healing requires boundaries. Toxicity requires access. One has to go. And when you choose healing, you will feel pressure to explain, to soften, to compromise your growth. But every time you go back to old patterns to make others comfortable, you delay your own freedom. Choosing yourself isn't cruelty. It isn't selfishness. It's self-respect. And anyone who truly wants the best for you will not ask you to bleed again just so they can feel secure. No one really talks about this part. Healing feels lonely, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're no longer vibrating at the same emotional frequency as the people around you. You start to notice things you once ignored, forced conversations that feel empty, fake concern that shows up only when it's convenient, shallow connections that can't go beyond surface level talk, emotional immaturity that you use to excuse but can no longer tolerate. And that awareness hurts Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You realize that some relationships were held together by habit, not depth, by comfort, not connection, by fear of being alone, not genuine understanding. So yes, healing can feel isolating. There are moments when the silence feels heavy, when you wonder if you made the right choice, when you miss the familiarity of people you've outgrown. But listen carefully to this. Loneliness is temporary. Self-betrayal lasts forever. Feeling alone for a season is far less painful than staying connected to people who require you to abandon yourself. Healing isn't about collecting more people. It's about becoming someone you don't have to escape from. And as uncomfortable as this phase feels, it's a sign you're shedding what no longer aligns. You're not losing connection. You're making space for something real. This is where many people mess up. They try to explain themselves. They explain their boundaries. They explain their distance. They explain their silence. They explain their growth. But toxic people don't want understanding. They want access. They want something to push against, something to question, something to twist into an argument. And the moment you start explaining, you give them exactly that. Because explanations turn into debates. Debates turn into justifications. And justifications slowly erase your boundaries. Here's the truth. Your healing does not need permission. Your peace does not need justification. People who genuinely care about you will respect your boundaries without needing a detailed explanation. People who don't will never be satisfied, no matter how clearly you explain. Silence in this phase isn't avoidance. It isn't punishment. It's protection. Silence removes fuel from emotional games. Silence keeps you grounded when manipulation tries to pull you back in. Silence makes your boundaries unmovable. And yes, some people will misunderstand you. Let them. Being misunderstood is often the price of emotional maturity. You don't owe access to anyone who disrespects your limits. You don't owe clarity to people who use it against you. Sometimes the strongest boundary you can set is simply choosing not to explain yourself anymore. Because silence, used with intention, is often the loudest boundary of all. Real healing doesn't look dramatic. It looks quiet. It looks like responding instead of reacting, taking a breath instead of taking the bait. It looks like walking away without closure, not because you're weak, but because you finally understand that not everyone deserves access to your energy. Real healing is choosing peace over being right, letting go of the need to win arguments that only drain you. It's allowing people to misunderstand you without rushing to correct the narrative. Because you know who you are, and that's enough. It's protecting your energy unapologetically, saying no without guilt, creating distance without resentment, and choosing yourself without explanation. And here's the uncomfortable truth no one warns you about. The healthier you become, the smaller your circle gets, but the safer it feels. You stop surrounding yourself with noise. You stop entertaining chaos. You stop confusing intensity with connection. What remains may be fewer people, but it's more honesty, more respect, and more peace. Healing doesn't isolate you from life. It refines it. You don't lose people who matter. You lose people who needed you to stay unhealed. And what you gain in return is something far more valuable than approval: inner safety. If certain people became distant when you started healing, that wasn't loss, that was alignment. Not everyone is meant to walk with the healed version of you. Some people only knew how to love the version of you that was broken, reactive, or available to their control. And when you finally step into your calm, centered, and boundary-filled self, their discomfort isn't about you, It's about what they can no longer manipulate. So don't shrink to make others comfortable. Don't reopen old wounds to save relationships that never valued your growth. And don't feel guilty for outgrowing people, patterns, or places that kept you small. Your healing is not a betrayal. It's a reclamation. It's a declaration that your energy, peace, and boundaries matter. If this message hit you, comment, "I choose healing" below, and let others see that growth isn't shameful. It's powerful. And subscribe, because the next video will show you how to protect your peace, how to stay unshakable, and how to grow without feeling selfish. You don't have to explain your growth. You just have to live it and watch everything align around the person you're becoming.